Hello and welcome to everyone attending our webinar today, wherever you are in the world. This Cedar Bay webinar is entitled Project, A Guide to Better Control. My name's Steve Barker, I'm the Consulting Services Manager at Cedar Bay, and I'm joined today by Chris Anthony, who's one of our functional business consultants. If you don't mind, I'll talk to you about a couple of quick housekeeping items. I'll run through them before we begin the main show. We have deliberately muted all microphones. There is a question box available within the webinar, so please ask any relevant questions that you have throughout the webinar. A recording of the webinar will be emailed to you at the end of the session. We have two surveys or poll questions built into the webinar, so if you get time, we'd really appreciate if you could take a second or two to answer the questions, please. We recognise that there are many people on the webinar who have not seen IFS projects before. We will get quite detailed quite quickly, but if you do need more information after the webinar about IFS project, please do not hesitate to contact us. This webinar is part of a series of webinars that we're running through 2021, designed to share our knowledge in areas of IFS in the hope that we will empower you to extend your use of IFS within your application. All of our webinars will be made available on our website very soon, so if you or any of your colleagues would like to view them later, please look in our info hub under www.cedar-bay.com, where you'll find this webinar and all the previous webinars. Just to set the scene, I hope everyone will agree with me that IFS is a great ERP solution. The IFS projects functionality gives businesses like yours a simple and effective way to manage project-related costs, revenues, and timelines. I'll hand over to Chris in a second, but before I do, I just wanted to explain to you that everything you'll see today from Chris is delivered using standard IFS Apps 10 functionality. Please feel free to ask questions throughout the webinar. There is a slight delay, however, between when you post your question and when we see your question, so we will answer these questions towards the end. So without any further delay, I'll hand over to Chris.
Thank you, Steve. Okay, so often IFS projects is implemented because it does a really good job of collating costs with lots of good budgetary controls built in. And this also leads to things like your cost-centric webinars and demonstrations. So for this webinar, I'm going to give you a different view on projects. We're going to look at it from more of an operational side of things, and we're going to look at some really useful features that can help you in the day-to-day control of projects. So first of all, I'm going to start off with a project overview that just gives some project terminology and descriptions of the project structure for anybody that may not be familiar with the way that IFS does this already. Then we're going to have a look in depth at the resource planning and how we can plan by groups or by individuals and see whether our project is going to overload available resource. So some really good capacity planning functionality. And then in time reporting, we know we can capture hours that have been booked and the costs of those hours. But here we're going to have a look at the effect of the time bookings on capacity planning as well, particularly when an individual is booking time and then how that affects overall resource capacity within a group. Then under project tasks, we're going to show another level of tracking, a much more detailed level in projects that allows us to identify discrete actions that can be assigned to specific people with dates. And we'll also look here at how we can track progress really effectively from individual tasks and how that impacts on the project as a whole. And then in project MRP, I'll demystify the whole process and show that it really is just MRP with boundaries and with some clarity on how supplies can be aggregated across multiple projects for efficient ordering while keeping projects under control. So before I get stuck into the detail, our first poll question. So if you can have a look at the pop out and answer this, how much project functionality are you currently using? Are you using none at all? You're using it for finance purposes only? Have you got finance and basic project planning, or are you using all of that available functionality in IFS already? So I'll give you a couple of minutes to answer that, and we'll see where people are with their project's implementation. Okay, so we've got some numbers coming through. We've got a lot of people that are using the finance and the basic project planning, and then a fairly even split across the others. And that's a good proportion of people that have voted as well on that one. So yeah, so the bulk of people here, 61%, using the finance and basic project planning. So hopefully with that split, that's a good basis really for what we're going to go through to show you some more of that detail on the project planning side. So first of all, like I said, just a quick overview for people who may not be familiar with IFS projects, and in particular the terminology, because this can be different to some of the other project planning software that people use. So what we've got in IFS is a project, which would be the container for all of the work goes on within a project, and that collates all the costs and all of the things that go on within a project. Usually that can be associated with a customer as well, and all of your finances will fall out of that. Then within a project, you've got a sub-project, and a sub-project is just simply a folder. It's a collection of activities within that, so it's a way of just grouping things together. And the real the meat on the bones really for projects is in terms of the activity. The activity has all of the information that's required, and the project consists then of a sequence of activities with starts and finish dates for each activity that then feed through to the overall project. So a single activity will have a start or finish date, and therefore a duration. It will also have a status to show whether it is in a planning phase, whether it's released for activity, or if it's closed. And within each activity, we can associate demands. So customer orders could be a source of demand for us on activities. We can have our supplies, which would be our purchase orders, shop orders, inventory, all of that sort of thing connected. And then for today's webinar, we're going to look at resources. So this is where we look at the applying specific resources to an activity with a number of hours, with those start-finish dates, and then also then underneath the activity, that more detailed level of associated tasks, which are sort of broken down into much more finer detail. Okay, so. First, starting with project resources, and this is anybody on different versions of IFS will maybe not recognize this, but this is the Apps 10 setup for project resources now, where we can actually have a hierarchy of resources that's kind of set up within Apps 10 that can be applied to projects, slightly different to the way it was set up in previous versions. In this example, I've created this hierarchy of project resource. So I've got my very top level, which just says project resource, and underneath that, I've created some resource groups, and within those resource groups, we've got the individuals that belong to it. So I've got 3 groups here: a designer, electrical engineer, and a project manager. And then within my groups, I've associated specific people. So if I look at my electrical engineer here, I've got Brian, Dominic, Edwin, and John, all belong to that resource group. Then when we come to use those resources in projects, we've got 2 different ways of treating the groups. First of all, we can treat them at just simply at a group level by saying, I've got a resource group called electrical engineer, and I'm gonna set up my capacity based on the fact I've got a fixed number of people in there with the utilization. So in this instance, I'm saying I've got electrical engineers and I've got 4 of them, and it doesn't matter that whether I've got people in there or not. And in fact, the number of people that belong to my resource group isn't even related to this number. This number could be 10 with only 4 people sort of like listed in the group, because what I'm doing here is I'm just taking that group and saying I'm going to use this number as the basis for my capacity. So what we're doing here is we're taking 4 people using a standard calendar that we associate with the group, and that gives us a total number of hours for that particular group. So if I looked on a weekly basis, if my calendar was a 40-hour a week calendar, and I've got 4 resources, then that will give me 160 hours a week within that particular group. I've then got the utilization and adjustment numbers, which we'll see on the graphs later, which allow us to have a view on how far we've loaded a particular resource. So, we're not expecting that out of 160 hours a week, we've got every single hour available for working on projects. People will have meetings to attend, or training sessions, or breaks, or whatever it is that we have to build in, but we have to make some kind of allowance for that. So we've got two options for doing that, which is a utilization, and then we've got an adjustment which we can apply just purely from a planning perspective to say, even though we've got 85% utilization, I'm not going to plan more than 75% just for contingency. Then we can also time bound that capacity as well. So in this case, I've got 4 people available till 2025, but I could actually have this staggered and flex depending on when I needed resource. If it was going to increase or decrease over time, then we can have those changes built into the group as well. Okay, so that's one way that we can in projects actually allocate a capacity to a resource group. The other way we can do it is to actually do it from the individuals themselves. So this is actually now looking at the number of people, or the actual people that I've associated with that resource group. So in this case, I've got Brian, Dominic, Edwin, and John. We're going to look at the way that Brian is set up, because Brian's a special case here. I've got Brian set up in both the electrical engineer group and the designer group. So you can see I've got a little bit of a problem in trying to manage the electrical engineers as a group of 4 people, because Brian's not actually available for all of his time in the electrical engineer group. He's going to be required in the designer group as well. And if I count him in both groups, it means I've got too much capacity showing on my available capacity charts. So when we're dealing with individuals, what we can do here is actually allocate them as a percentage to a group. So in this case here, Brian, I've got associated with the both groups here, design and electrical engineer. I've got 60% of him in the design group and 40% in the electrical engineering group. So that means looking at Brian's specific calendar, as opposed to the resource group's calendar, we'll look at the calendar that Brian's got, and Brian might be on a 40-hour-a-week calendar, in which case 60% of those hours are going to be allocated into the designer group, 40% into the electrical engineer group. And then when we look at the resource group as a whole, what we're doing is we're adding up the available hours from each of those people within the group. So in this case, we would have less hours in this group, given I may have 3 people at 40 hours and 1 person at 16 hours. Okay. Okay, this is a view now of how we then actually allocate those hours to an activity. So within a project, I gave the overview at the very start. We've got the project at the top level here called concept to product, and underneath here we've got the sub projects. So quoted administration, product design. These are all sub projects, and then underneath the sub project here, product design, I've got the activities. So I've got a product design activity, DFMEA activity, and so on. So these individual activities are where we allocate the resource. We don't allocate resource to a sub-project. We don't allocate resource to a project. We just allocate them purely to the activities. And then those activities can be aggregated to show resource that has been associated with the activities that contain within it. So we still have the view at sub-project level of these things, but in terms of directing that resource requirement, it's on a very specific activity. So on this activity that I've got here, 1505 product design, we've got the start and finish dates. So this activity is due to start on the 22nd of February, and it's due to finish on the 16th of April. That is the total span of the activity itself. Then within that activity, I've said here I'm going to need time from the product design group or the designer group, and I've given a requirement of 200 hours. So what I'm saying here is I'm allocating 200 hours for that designer group between the dates of the 22nd of Feb and the 16th of April. Now, we treat this very simply from a capacity planning perspective, and we just spread those evenly across the amount of days between the start and the finish date. So those 200 hours just spread evenly between the start and finish dates to say a number of hours. That might not be the same in execution, where people don't work an even number of hours on every project every day, but from a capacity planning perspective, it does give us that view of what has been allocated over time. Okay, so here is a view now of the aggregation. So I've selected now the sub-project, sub-project 15, which is product design and development, that contains all of the activities below. So we can see in that aggregation, first of all, that we have the activities listed. So we can see my product design activity that I've planned 200 hours. I've also got 200 hours planned on activity 1520 as well. So I can see under a sub-project which activities have I allocated resource to and how many hours have I allocated them to. But also I can see a complete aggregate of all of the hours for that particular resource within a sub-project. And that can also be seen, that view is also available at the project level, so you can see overall how many total hours have we got in each resource group aggregated as well. So we can got very good aggregation from activities up through sub-projects to the project. Then here is the view when we look at this in terms of load. So what I've got here is the load graph as it looks from that one project that I've just been loading resource hours onto. So this is just the one project that I'm looking at. We have the very top line on this graph is the maximum number of hours available. So this is based on our calendar. So in this case, we've got 120 hours, which would be our maximum amount of hours available. Then with our efficiency or utilization level at 85%, we're down at 105 or so hours, and then with a 75%, we're down at 90 hours. So these three lines allow us to take a view on how we're loaded. And when I look at my specific project that I'm looking at the minute and the way that I've just loaded those hours, I can see that that's a reasonable amount of hours that's loaded. It's spread evenly across the durations of the activity, so I don't have any kind of really strange peaks or anything going on, and there's plenty of spare space. So as I'm concerned, as project manager, just looking at my own project, this looks fine as it is. But we're also able to see that overlaid with the projects, all of the other projects that are currently have resource loaded as well. So we're looking at, again, we're just looking at a single resource group, so maybe my designers, and I'm looking at how they're loaded, given that we've already got projects in existence. So now I can see that putting my project in has actually caused an overload in this period here. Okay, I'm not only over my kind of planning limits, I've actually exceeded the total available capacity as well. So it's at this point as a project manager that I'd be concerned that my project is not going to be successful. I'm not going to be able to achieve the dates that I've put into the project because my resource commitment is too heavy. In this case, in reality, possibly because we have plenty of white space around the overload, that actually it's not too much of a problem, because as I said, we're looking at actually an even spread of hours between the start and finish dates of the activities. So it could be that we just rephase some of the activities, maybe bring them forward in this particular project because we have this demand, this peak demand going on in the middle. Okay. But at this point, we'd be discussing, so as a project manager now, rather than looking at things in isolation and how resources affect my specific project, I'm looking at the overview of all of the projects and maybe consulting either resource managers or other project managers to ensure that we can get these all of these projects done with the available resource that we've got. Okay, so as we go through our projects and we've allocated resource to the projects, the next thing that we'll see is that people will be booking their time and an individual report time to a project to a specific activity. And we want to be able to take that into account when we're looking at capacity, because if we've planned 200 hours for an activity, but we've already reported 190 of them, then obviously there's only 10 hours left. What we don't want to be doing is continuing looking at this bucket of 200 hours for an activity that's not finished. So what happens here is if we've associated a person with a resource group, when they've reported their time for the resource group that they belong to, the number of hours that we've got in our capacity plan actually reduces by the total number of hours that have been booked. And in this case, we can see that I've got an 8 hours a day loaded for this particular resource. We've reported some time, and then the hours have reduced across all of the days in that period, and that's due to that spreading. So we're still spreading the total number of remaining hours across the activity. Right. But it does take into account that we've booked some time, so therefore there's less time required left, and we can see that on our capacity graphs as well. Right, I'm going on to project tasks now. This is where sometimes there's a kind of a difference in terminology between the IFS projects, project planning, and maybe a Microsoft project. A task in IFS projects is like a to-do list that belongs within an activity. So the activity itself has got start and finish dates. And what we can do underneath that activity is just give a list of tasks and identify people that are responsible for them. There's no specific capacity planning alongside this that we've just seen. The resources are all planned on the activity level, not on the task level. But what we can do with this is be a bit more specific about the things that have to happen. So if we do have specific people needing to do jobs within that time, then what we can do is we can list all those jobs out for people, assign them to the various people, and give them a date for them to start those tasks on. So again, here in the first column, we've got the activity. So 1505 activity product design. This will have then a task name that belongs within that activity, and the information about the task that can have lots more detail in, so very specific detail of what needs to be done here. So in this example here, product definition is the task name. We need to get to some kind of product definition. The job that needs to be done is to meet with the stakeholders and collect the detailed requirements, and we're going to give that to Corinne here, and we're expecting her to start that on the 22nd of February. And so on. So we can create these lists, and this gives us a lot more granularity in terms of the tasks that are needed to see an activity through to completion. Quite often when you're not using tasks in IFS projects, you get to see activities, and you get to see whether activities are nearing completion, but what's handled usually outside of IFS is that list of things that need to be done. Maybe a project manager's got its own to-do lists and things like that. So this is a way in IFS to track all of that. So we can set that up. We can identify the people responsible, give them the date they need to be done. And then in IFS now we have the lobby for project tasks. And this lobby here gives us the list of tasks that have been assigned. So as I'm going into this lobby, I'm looking at my own tasks. So what's been given to me in that task list, and then in that task list I get the name, the start date, and also the due date of when it's due to be finished, which activity and which project it belongs to. I also get my counters, which give me tasks to do in the next 7 days. So things to start and things to finish, and things to start and finish that are critical, on the critical path. And then from here, I can also report progress on those tasks. And reporting progress is done slightly different to the way we report time. We can see on an activity that we have 200 hours that's been planned, and we have reported 150 hours, which means we are 3/4 of the way, 75% complete. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we've done all of the work that needs to be done. We may have booked 150 hours, but have we done all of the tasks that would lead us to that? So what we can do with tasks is, given a list of tasks, we can set up a way of monitoring progress against those specific tasks. So back at our view here, this is a view that a project manager may have of all the tasks that are due to be done. We got them sorted into a date order, and we can see who's responsible for them. We can also see whether those tasks are completed or not. And there's also a progress indicator, which we're going to have a look at in a second. We also have the completion dates. So from a project manager's perspective, they're not just looking at the hours reported on an activity or the cost reported on an activity. They can see where are we with all of the things that needed to be done. Okay. So for us to report progress against a task, we can set up something called a progress template. And progress template is a definition that we define as project managers to say these are the steps for each task that you would expect to go through in a project, or this is kind of the status that a task could have, and that's associated with a percentage level of progress. So I've defined this one. I've decided it's going to be 5 steps for the tasks in my project, and I'm going to call each of these steps. Step 1 is going to be started. Step 2 is in progress. Step 3, 50% complete. Step 4, maybe it's nearly complete but requires approval. And step 5 is complete. And then for each of these steps, I've associated then a percentage. So I've said if somebody sets a task at started, I'm going to assume a 10% progress on that. They've made a start, but we've not got very far through it. And if we're requiring approval, it means we're nearly the end of the task and just a final step over the line. But this can be defined exactly the way that you want it to be done. And not only can that be defined the way you want it to be done, you can have multiple progress templates depending on the type of task. So you could have progress templates for one type of task that are very simple. Maybe it's a started and finished. Maybe there's something else that goes through multiple steps. Maybe a design approval that has to have certain levels of sign off as you go through it. So you might have multiple templates to apply then. And then for each task, what we can see is this is a single task here that I've got plan resources, hours, and costs. And as I select each step, so here progress is selected as started, and it's given us a 10% completion in the bar. Then I have changed that to requires approval, and it's gone to 80%. And then the final step, I've completed it. So now I've got 100% progress, and also it's identified as completed on the task as well. And I can see all that as a project manager when the individuals are updating their tasks with their progress. We can see how that's coming through. Now the other thing is that we can roll that progress up into the activity, and we can roll it up into the sub-project, and we can roll it up into the project. And we do that by changing the progress method on the activity to tasks. And I think it's important just to recognize here that in most cases, in most projects, your progress method is going to be based on your costs or your hours. And typically it's not going to be much different for most of those activities. But it is possible to have a single activity that has a different progress method to the rest of the activities in the project. So you could do the majority of your activities with costs or hours, and then have the tasks connected as a connected progress method on a dedicated activity for that purpose. So we set for an activity, then we choose the progress method to be the task. And then what we can see is that alongside all of the other things that are happening in the activity, so this is just a single task within that activity, there are other tasks as well going on. That first step here where I've changed it to started, I've got 10% progress on just that task, but it's rolled up into the activity, and my activity now is 22.5% complete. That also then rolls up into the project, and my project is 10.41% complete. So that progress step that I've chosen has had that impact on the activity, and it's rolled up into the project as well. Then going through the next step of requiring approval, I go to 80% on my task, which then changes my activity to 40%, and my project is then 11.53%, and so on. And you can see how that would work in tracking progress as you go through the tasks. Okay, I'm going to go on to materials now, and first of all, just going to go through how the connections kind of work in IFS again, just for people who may not be familiar with this part of it. But what I want to show really is how a connection is inherited once you connect to demand, how we can get all of our supplies sort of still existing within the project. And what I've got here is I've got a customer order line which we connect to a project activity. So again, we're connecting to an activity rather than a project or a sub-project. It's the activity level it's connected to. Then project MRP will look at the demands from that customer order line, and it will observe the project connection. So when project MRP then generates your shop orders and your shop order requisitions, it will also carry over that project activity and connect it to the shop order itself, so that you don't have to do that. Project MRP is kind of maintaining that inheritance. And then when project MRP looks at the shop order demands, it will create purchase orders, again carrying through that project activity. So we're only connecting that project to the activity in one instance, which is on the demand line. Project MRP then is maintaining that inheritance as we go down through all of the supplies. Here's the examples in IFS of that happening. So I've got two order lines here for one of each of these parts, and I've connected them to two different IDs. So the top one is connected to activity 510 and the next one 515. We see that the shop order requisitions have been connected to 510 and 515, and then the sorry, these are the shop order requisitions, and then the purchase order requisitions are also then connected through. So you've got a one-for-one relationship of all those connections. So you maintain those materials, sort of that integrity with the project activity. So I want to have a quick look at netting, because even though that's great, it can, if we're not careful, introduce some problems. So we just want to sort of go through the netting process that Project MRP does, so that you get an understanding of it. So again, looking at our customer order lines here with connected to our different activities, we've generated then shop orders that are on a one-for-one basis, just as we saw in the previous example. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to apply a minimum lot size to the material. So what we're going to see then is that Project MRP will look at our minimum lot size, and it will make a purchase order requisition that will require that minimum lot size. And because of the activity connections, the first thing it does, it looks at activity 510, creates the shop order, creates the supply. We need one for activity 510. We've got a minimum lot size of 20, so we have a requisition of 20 pieces. It then would look at activity 515, create the shop order for one, activity 515, and then create the supply for that activity 515. Again, we need one for that order, minimum lot size of 20, so we order 20 for it. So this is obviously a problem if we're dealing with minimum lot sizes, because in this case we wouldn't need to order another 20 for this requirement. Ideally, we would use one of those 20 that we'd ordered on the activity 510, and we'd use those on 515. So we have some options to go through with Project MRP to tell it how to resolve that situation. The three options we've got in the netting of the demands and supplies within projects is by activity, which is the one we've just looked at. What that does is that runs a single MRP run. You've got to think of it as a single MRP run just for one activity, as if that activity exists in complete isolation to anything else. And then MRP will generate supplies and demands for that activity. It will then finish, and then it will go on to the next activity and do the same again. And it won't be looking at any supplies and demands that exist in the other activity at all. It'll only be doing it on that one activity. So this is even within a single project. MRP, the project MRP will only look at activities in isolation. So that's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is to do it by project. And in this case, what MRP does is it looks at a project and all of the activity supply and demands within it. So it runs for project one. It will run for all of the activities in project one and look at the demands and supplies in all of those activities before it then goes on to project two and does the same again. But we still have the same issue that if we have a demand in project one or a supply in project one that has excess inventory, that won't be absorbed in project two if we're running it just by project. And that may be a desired consequence of this. You know, in some cases, what you may want is your projects to be entirely separate because they're all costed separately anyway. If you've got minimum batch sizes that come in as a result of one project, and that's covered by the cost of the project, and then your second project is independent, then that's absolutely fine, and there's nothing particularly wrong with doing that. But it's just you know, there's more that we can do in IFS to share inventory across projects if we want to, and that is to set up our own defined netting groups. In its simplest form, I've got an example here of two netting groups, but in its simplest form, you could just have all of your projects under a single netting group, and that means that project MRP will aggregate your supplies and demands across all of your projects in one hit. But it's also possible to define what groups that you want projects to be netted in as well. Again, you might have discrete areas that you don't want to share inventory or supplies with different groups of your projects. So it's possible to set that up, and that's entirely user definable. So you have plenty of options in IFS for that. So let's have a quick look now. I'm just going to pick the by project example. This could just as easily be by group as well, but I've only got one project in my example, so it's a project example. And we go back and look at the situation of having the sales quantities of one each and connected to two different activities, and we go through create the shop orders. And in this case, what we're doing is we're looking at activity 510 first, and we hit the minimum lot size requirement. So a quantity of 20 pieces of supply is generated by PMRP for activity 510. Then project MRP, when it comes to look at the requirement for 515, instead of creating a new supply for that 515, it looks over at 510 and says, you've already got 20 pieces being ordered on 510. So I'm gonna recommend, because it doesn't have to be automatic, so I'm going to recommend that we take one of those pieces from 510 and put it into 515, and that recommendation comes up as a material transfer requisition. Okay, so material transfer requisition is something that exists to move inventory and move supplies between activities either within a project or across projects. And there's some controls that we can put on a material transfer. I've got an example here. This is just one way of setting it up, which says that if I've got if project MRP tells me to transfer material between activities, and it happens within the same project, then we're just going to execute that automatically. So we don't need to have any kind of approvals or monitoring of that event. What we'll do is we'll just move that inventory over as soon as it becomes available. So you know, we're connecting to a supply, we've got demand, we're connecting to a supply, and then when that supply is received, we'll move that over into the appropriate activity. The other case that I've got here is if I'm moving between projects, maybe I want to have a manual requisition process that requires the approval of project manager of project one and the approval of the project manager in project two, because we may want for the project manager on project one to verify that he has got available inventory, that it's not going to be used for some other purpose, or he's got some other reason for holding on to that. But also, because this also involves a transfer of cost, because you're going to be moving inventory from one project to another, we've got to move those costs from one project to another as well. And we might want the project manager of project 2 to appreciate those costs and give their approval before any of that happens automatically. So that's a suggestion of how you could set it up, but whenever you have a material transfer request, your options are to have it as automatic, to require an approval from, or an approval to. So it could be that you only need the approval from the project, you don't need an approval going into a project. Or it could be the other way around, where you don't need an approval from, you just need an approval to, or you can have both in place and have those approvals required. So that gives us loads of control over what's happening with PMRP netting. So PMRP can give us those recommendations and say, look, you've got spare inventory in this project, move it over to the other project, but you've still got that gatekeeping exercise where a project manager can approve the release of material from their project into another project without having that all done automatically. Or if you're in a much simpler environment that you've got, maybe one project manager looking after all the projects, it could just be automated to save on the admin of doing any kind of approvals. So you've got lots of options there, but ways of keeping in control of that netting situation while not acquiring excess inventory along the way where you don't need to. Okay. So in summary, what we've seen here is that we can allocate resource by group, and we can look at groups of resource in two ways, either as a number of resources in a group, or by very specific individuals and how they work within the group. We can see how the individual time report in there affects our planned resource and available capacity. We've looked at how we can give us more granularity on an activity by listing tasks and assigning them to individuals, and we can see how those individuals can look at those tasks from their own view in their My Task screen, and also then update progress from those tasks. Then we looked at the project materials and how we have supplies and demands connected to specific activities, but we can also then effect a material transfer between activities, either automatic or with approvals. So I hope you've gained some insights there, and that's me done. I'll hand you back over to Steve, I think, who's got another poll question.
Okay, thank you very much, Chris. I hope everyone found that useful. Our second poll question is, are you likely to do more project planning in IFS now? So if you don't mind taking a few seconds to answer one of those 4 questions there. No changes needed. Prefer to use a third-party tool. You will look at more options, or you definitely want to use more IFS. It'd be really useful if you could just select some options there for us. I can see the results coming through. The majority of people, about 78%, are saying that they definitely want to use more IFS. So that's very interesting. If we combine that with the answer from the first poll, which was that 13% of the attendees don't use IFS project, then there's potentially a lot more use for IFS amongst this community here. So thank you very much. Usually at this stage, we have some questions, but quite unusually, we don't have any at the moment. So what I've done is I've gathered together a couple of commonly asked questions when we're doing project-related consultancy. I hope they're relevant. If there are any last-minute questions, you can put them into the webinar now. But we're often asked, how do I know if I've got IFS project or not? And as 13% of you are not using IFS project, I thought I'd just give you a quick answer as to how you can find out whether you've got it. In the IFS navigator on the left-hand side, if you just type projects with an S plural, or you type proj space nav, or you type activities, logged in as maybe IFS app if you've got access, or a high-level user, that will tell you whether you've got IFS projects or not. And if you don't, then you can't use it at the moment. You're going to have to talk to IFS about getting that component built into your installation. The other question we're often asked is, how many activities can you have on a project? Well, the exact precise answer to that is unknown to me, but I do know that some of IFS's larger MOD type customers have projects on them that have more than 2,000 activities. So I think that probably covers most small to medium sized businesses. If you need more than 2,000 activities, then it probably is a bit higher than that, but I know that 2,000 is a limit that IFS can certainly handle. And the other question I've got, I might need a bit of help from Chris here, but Project MRP, Chris, do we know approximately which version of IFS that was introduced into? I know it's in 10, I know it's in 9, but do we think Project MRP was in apps 8?
Yeah, certainly, and I've used it in 7.5 as well, so I know it goes back that far. My experience doesn't go much further back than 7.5, but it's certainly been there since then.
Okay, all right. I hope that was useful. Can you move on to the next slide for us then, Chris? So a couple of little closing statements here then from me. We are aware that we have a mix of IFS customers on this webinar that have different versions of IFS. The IFS project component itself has been around for many years, going back as far as IFS 2000, I believe. If you're interested in talking more about IFS project and how that could benefit your business, then please don't hesitate to contact us using any of the details you can see on the slide. This slide. There is a question that's just come in, actually very late, but let's just see if we can grab that. This was being shown in IFS Arena, correct? Yes, that's right, isn't it, Chris? The slides that you had were Arena based.
That's correct. Yeah, Arena is the interface of choice now for doing demonstrations. So whenever you see webinars, it's highly likely you're going to see Arena interface.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Chris. Okay, so just closing off, we'd be very happy to speak to you individually if you had any questions about how IFS project might benefit your business. There is another webinar. Our next webinar is CRM related. So if that's of interest to you, that's being held on the 18th of February, 2021. Jay is the consultant delivering that, and it's going to be hosted by Joe. 18th of February, 3 p.m. UK time, GMT. I'd just like to say thank you all for attending this project webinar and hope that you gained some new knowledge that you didn't have before about the art of using IFS projects to benefit your business. We hope you have a great afternoon and thank you very much.